Hey, my name is Laura Desmond. I'm curator at the Monhegan Museum and a member of the Monhegan Associates Ecology Committee. And I'll be playing the role of MC this evening. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 4th annual Edward L. Deci Endowed Lecture. As most of you here know, Deci led the Monhegan Museum of Art and History for 36 years, serving as its director and president. Ed did so much in so many ways to build the museum and its collection, helping to create this treasure for the Monhegan community and all who care about it. Upon Ed's retirement, this series was created to honor his many contributions to the museum and the community. So, yay. Tonight's lecture will be recorded, and if all goes well, it will be posted on the Monhegan Associates and the Monhegan Museum's web pages in the next few days. Before we get started, I want to thank both the Monhegan Associates and the Monhegan Museum of Art and History for collaborating on this year's series of lectures and workshops. The series highlights the 2025 exhibit at the Monhegan Museum, Art, Ecology, and the Resilience of a Maine Island, the Monhegan Wildlands, which traces the changing ecology of Monhegan through the lens of the artworks that depict the island. We'd like to thank also Monhegan House for its generous support of this collaborative series of lectures and workshops. Thanks to all the members of the Monhegan Associates Ecology Committee and the staff of the Monhegan Museum for organizing the lecture series, and to Jim Galvin for helping to record the lectures in the series. And a big thank you to all of you attending. It's your support that makes the lectures possible. We encourage you to support the Wildlands by becoming a member of the Monhegan Associates and to support the Monhegan Museum by becoming a museum member. You can go to the Monhegan Associates website and click on the donate button and do the same thing at the Monhegan Museum website, or you can become a member at the museum store when you visit the exhibit. I want to invite you to join us for upcoming programs in this series. On September 11th, artist Barbara Putnam, whose woodcuts you may have seen if you saw this exhibit at the Bowdoin College venue, will be leading a wildlands-based workshop using scratchboard as a medium. So that's September 11th. September 18th, we will have bird migration researcher Scott Weidensall. And in the last week of September, we will be rescheduling the talk by Donald Soktoma, director of the Passamaquoddy Tribe Historic Preservation Office. So stay tuned for details on those. Before I introduce the speaker, I want to let you know that we will be taking questions after the end of the talk, so save your questions for the end. And now, without further ado, we have this marvelous opportunity tonight to learn about eco-critical approaches to American and global art history, and specifically to explore new avenues for examining our understanding of the Monhegan wildlands and for considering the tradition of artists encountering and responding to Monhegan's natural and cultural landscapes. It's my pleasure to introduce now Dr. Alan C. Braddock, who is the Ralph H. Wark Professor of Art History, Environmental Humanities, and American Studies at William and Mary, where he teaches courses on the history of art, ecology, and animal studies. He's the author of 2 books, Implication, an Eco-Critical Dictionary for Art History, and Thomas Eakins in the Cultures of Modernity. And he has co-edited 3 others, A Keener Perception, Eco-Critical Studies in American Art History, A Green Country Town, Philadelphia's Ecology in the Cultural Imagination, and Nature's Nation, American Art and Environment, which won 3 national awards. His talk tonight is titled A Dynamic Niche, Monhegan Modernism and Island Ecology. And please help me welcome to Monhegan, Alan Braddock.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. It's great to see such a wonderful turnout. I wish this many students will show up to my classes. Uh, It's been wonderful to visit. Let me just thank the museum and the community here. It's been wonderful talking with Jen and Laura and Adam and Lynn and other members of the community who've given me such a warm welcome. I have been to Monhegan once before. It was a long time ago, about 12 years ago. And the two vivid things I remember from that visit were taking a walk out to Whitehead in the middle of the night in pitch darkness and almost walking off the cliff. Obviously, that didn't happen. And then I think Bob Stahl gave me a tour of the Kent Fitzgerald house. And I don't know if this is allowed, but I was allowed to sit in Kent's chair. And he probably tells this to everyone, but he said, pay attention to how it leans to the left. She has that little bit of socialist humor. Anyway, I've been teaching and writing things about art and ecology for more than 20 years now at various institutions. And it's just really gratifying to see the groundswell of interest in that here. And it's, I think, proof of how a place like Monhegan can be a kind of crucible, a catalyst for interdisciplinary thinking across boundaries. That's kind of what I'm all about as an art history professor who's interested in ecology. The exhibition, which I saw today, is fantastic. A model of interdisciplinary scholarship and display. And the book is great. The folks at the museum sent me a copy months ago, and I finally finished reading it last week. And it's just great. The richness of the conversation between art and science and the cultural history here. I learned a lot. And I'll probably use it to teach my art and ecology class, or parts of it anyway, to teach my art and ecology class at William and Mary. I'm not an expert on Monhegan, and I'm not a biologist. And so I feel a little intimidated by the knowledge in this room, but I'm going to try to say something about the art here that maybe hasn't been said before. Bear with me and be gentle with your questions, please. So I want to begin. There's the book. I want to begin. I'm going to read a script, and I know that's not optimal, but I'll try to read it in an animated way. And then at the end, I will invite your very animated responses and questions and that sort of thing. I want to begin my remarks not at Monhegan and Manana, but at another important island archipelago, the Galapagos. Located about 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador in the South Pacific, the Galapagos might seem to be remote from our concerns here on Monhegan, but I hope to convince you of their relevance. As historians of science and art know, the Galapagos played a crucial role in Charles Darwin's development of the theory of evolution through natural selection, based on his visit there during the 1830s on a now famous exploratory voyage of the HMS Beagle. Among his many observations, Darwin noted the curious fact that the forms of certain animals on the Galapagos Islands, including finches and mockingbirds, varied noticeably from similar birds on the mainland. With help from the eminent British ornithologist John Gould and his wife, Elizabeth Gould, a scientific illustrator who produced these images, Darwin deduced that members of these bird species had migrated to the islands from the mainland eons ago, and that their descendants had gradually mutated over millennia, specifically by evolving new beak shapes in adaptation to the distinctive types of food available in the insular environment. Explaining this startling morphological discovery, Darwin said, "When I see these islands in sight of each other and possessed of but a scanty stock of animals, tenanted by these birds, but slightly differing in structure and filling the same place in nature, I must suspect they are only varieties. If there is the slightest foundation for these remarks, the zoology of archipelagos will be well worth examining, for such facts would undermine the stability of species." Here Darwin was quietly calling into question nearly 2,000 years of received wisdom in Western science and faith, which had represented creation as static and permanent. Today, following Darwin, modern ecologists describe such phenomena in terms of species migrating and occupying a new biological niche, one that has the dynamic effect of producing evolutionary adaptation. Over long periods of time, through natural selection of advantageous traits, adaptation results in changes of bodily structure and shape. Summarizing his theory of evolution, Darwin underscored the remarkable variety of these morphological mutations at the conclusion of his great treatise on the origin of species by saying, "There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved." Darwin's epoch-making discovery of evolution through natural selection resulted from his research and analysis of island ecology as a dynamic niche of adaptation. Particularly interesting here for our purposes is his reference to endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, for it indicates the convergence of aesthetic and ecological perception. Indeed, as noted by the editors of this important 2009 catalog of an exhibition organized by Yale and the Fitzwilliam Museum, Cambridge, titled "Endless Forms, Art and Visual Representation Played a Central Role in Darwin's Work, not only by documenting scientific observations, but also by prompting speculation about the material influence of beauty, creativity, and diversity in nature." All of this makes me wonder how we might think about Monhegan as a dynamic niche that has generated endless forms over long periods of time. To my knowledge, no unique or endemic species have evolved on this island, since it is neither as large as the Galapagos nor as far from the mainland. So no discernible adaptive variations have occurred here in species. The species inhabiting Monhegan are like those on the mainland, and the catalog of the current exhibition alludes to this fact by brilliantly explaining the island's environmental and artistic history, from its geological origins to its use as a fishing depot by indigenous Wabanaki people, to its early colonization and agricultural development by Europeans, to its emergence as a modern site of lobstering, art making, and tourism. As I said, not being a biologist or an expert on Monhegan art history, I can't hope to add much to this story, but I'll offer a few thoughts about one facet of art and ecology here that I find especially intriguing for the way it resonates with Darwin's insights, as well as with the broader scope of modern art and current events. Specifically, I would like to highlight how certain works of modern art produced at Monhegan since the early 20th century have leveraged the often astonishing clarity of the island's air and atmosphere with unusual vividness. Despite harsh New England winters and frequent fogs, Monhegan has also long been known for the sparkling clearness of its skies on many days, a fact confirmed by many historical accounts, such as this 1879 History of New England, referring to Captain George Weymouth's early exploration of the island. The region, said these historians, the region visited by Weymouth, in consequence of its glowing representations of the same, became a subject of all-absorbing interest in England. It was said that nowhere on earth could be found more sunny skies, a more genial clime, or more fertile soil. The forests were of unspeakable grandeur, the water of crystal purity, and it was a luxury to breathe its salubrious air. Yeah. A sense of that clear, salubrious air also comes through with particular vividness in these and other pictures by Rockwell Kent, Jamie Wyeth, and Sylvia Alberts, artists familiar to you all, whose work provides the focus of my presentation. In depicting Monhegan, these artists seem to have been inspired by the clarity of the island's atmosphere to emphasize and create interesting visual forms and patterns that effectively blend representation with abstraction. Whereas modernism in art is generally defined by its emphasis on abstract form, the works of these artists keep both realism and abstraction in suspension together, such that we cannot help noticing abstract forms underlying their representation of the Monhegan environment, including its atmospheric clarity. Moreover, all three of the artists in question, Kent, Wyeth, and Alberts, creatively reused certain forms and patterns in multiple works through a kind of aesthetic variation, indicating their innovative artistic adaptation to the Monhegan environment. Such adaptation obviously did not unfold on an evolutionary time scale like the one theorized by Darwin, but all three artists had or have had an enduring connection to the island for many years, enabling them to observe and respond to a variety of sights and environmental nuances not easily noticed by casual visitors like me. What I'm suggesting then is that Kent, Wyeth, and Alberts learned to occupy the dynamic niche of the Monhegan environment, and specifically its atmosphere, in producing an artistic version of Darwin's endless forms. Monhegan was not entirely unique in this regard, either artistically or environmentally. Having lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and worked as a curator at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in a previous life, I know that the atmospheric clarity and culture of the Southwest environment also attracted many American modernists in search of new artistic material, just as Tahiti attracted Gauguin. And yet Monhegan did have a distinctive atmosphere and sense of place that Kent, Wyeth, and Alberts rendered with particular vividness, I would say. After discussing a selection of works by these artists in more detail, I conclude my presentation with a few reflections on the current condition and future prospects of Monhegan's air quality as a defining artistic and environmental trait of the island. Rockwell Kent's earliest pictures from Monhegan, painted shortly after his arrival in 1905, bear the stylistic influence of his New York teacher, Robert Henry, and it is Henry, even though it looks like Henri. His name was Americanized in the 19th century. And Henry was the leader of the Ashcan School of American Realists in New York City. Henry had already visited the island and encouraged Kent and his other students to do the same. At left, you see Henry's 1902 picture of snow in Central Park, and at right, Kent's winter Monhegan Island, painted a few years later, displaying similar loose, energetic brushwork with a deliberate lack of precision in delineating forms, even as it hints at the vivid contrasts of light and color on the island. I see hints of the future Kent in this horizon line, for example, and the contour of the head. Kent never completely abandoned the painterly lessons of his teacher, as indicated in this 1909 view of Blackhead, Monhegan Island, in which vigorous swirls of white pigment depict waves crashing against the rocks. However, the crisp upper contour of the headland again here and the distant horizon line point to a new, more precise linearity in Kent's style, along with a keener interest in formal patterns. Seeing and living in the Monhegan environment fostered a new approach to form that would soon appear regularly in picture after picture by the artist. Furthermore, in addition to embracing the atmospheric clarity of Monhegan as a source of inspiration in his stylistic turn to precisionism, Kent internalized certain features of the island's topography as quasi-abstract formal motifs or building blocks for composing later pictures in different contexts. See here how the jutting promontory of Blackhead at the upper left, painted initially by Kent in 1909, appears to reverberate in subsequent pictures set in Tierra del Fuego, Greenland, and again in Monhegan, respectively. Obviously, the rock formations in these pictures do not look identical, but artists often use such techniques of creative variation and reinterpretation across multiple works, borrowing from themselves conceptually in a mutating process that might be called aesthetic evolution. Kent clearly learned lessons about form and composition at Monhegan that served him throughout his career. My personal favorite in this vein is an undated work. I haven't even been able to locate this, so if anyone knows where this is, tell me. But it reduces the compositional elements of headland, ocean, horizon, and sky to the barest essentials in arguably one of Kent's most abstract paintings, recalling mid-20th century modernist works by Rothko or Tanguy. Another series of recurring formal motifs, again vividly exploiting the stark clarity of Monhegan's atmosphere, is exemplified in Kent's well-known picture titled Island Village, Coast of Maine, showing a panoramic elevated view of the sun-drenched Monhegan meadow, town, harbor, with Manana in the middle ground against the deep ocean, the deep blue ocean, cloud-lined horizon, and majestic sky rendered in a blue gradient. The clouds almost look like snow-capped mountains, crowned by a halo-like aura. By placing Manana in the center of the composition, just below the horizon, Kent gave the picture a strong sense of formal symmetry, as well as balance and stability, suggesting a kind of primordial solidity and simplicity about Monhegan, underscored by the clarity and visibility afforded by its pristine air. Several other pictures by Kent employed versions of the visual strategy seen here, with an oval-shaped central form anchoring the composition and vividly illuminated or silhouetted, as in Afternoon on the Sea, Monhegan, 1907, where the oval form is now the island. The wreck of the Deci Sheridan, where we see a similar kind of oval shape, again, formal experimentation. And then Young Spruce, Coast of Maine. With ever increasing formal precision, these pictures reveal Kent's complex, evolving modernist sensibility in their striking blend of realism and subtle underlying abstract logic. That sensibility in these works owe a fundamental debt to the atmosphere of Monhegan, I think, and the clarity of vision it afforded Kent. There's a sort of chicken and the egg question here. Is he just picturing what he sees? Or is he actually learning from the character of the atmosphere and embracing it as a stylistic approach? I think it's an interesting question to ponder. Jamie Wyeth began to visit Monhegan as a young boy in the 1950s with his father, Andrew. Although Jamie never met Rockwell Kent, he greatly admired the older artist and painted numerous tributes to him, including this one titled Kent House, Monhegan of 1972, depicting the dwelling Kent built for his mother in 1906 at the southern tip of the island. Whereas Kent had lived on Monhegan for about a decade in 2 5-year stints, Jamie Wyeth has maintained a close connection to the island since the late 1960s when he purchased this house as a personal residence and studio. Again, I know I'm not telling you anything to other scholars have commented about how Wyeth's picture here expresses the precarity of the house, exposed as it is to the elements, and recalling how Monhegan residents had warned Kent himself about the danger of building in that location where a powerful storm might sweep the structure away. I'm struck by how the painting also pays homage to Kent pictorially by focusing our attention on an object in the center of the composition and by emphasizing Monhegan's atmospheric clarity, creating a breathtaking perspective and depth of field. Not unlike Kent, but arguably to a greater degree, Wyeth experiments with abstract form within the visual language of realism. If we imagine the house away, block it out of your mind, the picture becomes a giant abstract canvas roughly divided into two halves, with a chaotic assortment of brown, yellow, and gray shapes below, and a monochrome blue color field above. Here we begin to see Wyeth's particular adaptation to the Monhegan environment and its endless forms. Even more than Kent, Wyeth uses a sense of atmospheric clarity and depth to amplify the distance between foreground and background, producing an almost dizzying effect of repoussoir, a French word for visual pushback. By putting something in the foreground like these rocks, things in the background sort of fly away. This becomes a veritable artistic signature for Wyeth in many of his works, including some of his earliest mature pictures, which were painted on Monhegan and Manana. For example, Bronze Age of 1967. I love this painting. Shows an aging, rusty fog warning bell, long decommissioned, but still standing guard like a sentinel, watching over the sea. Along with the familiar compositional approach of centering a focal object and stripping visual information down to a pattern of essential forms and shapes while retaining a convincing realism, we again see a breathtaking view into deep space, this time out to sea, despite the artist's famous declaration about turning his back to the ocean so that he could concentrate on island life. In my view, Wyeth's greatest formal and conceptual innovation as an artist, one that he clearly developed on Monhegan, is his ability to inject an uncanny sense of agency into non-human objects and beings, this old bell being a case in point. More than simply a nostalgic relic or defunct ruin, it stands there proudly, embodying and testifying to the island's history. Weirdly reminiscent, in fact, of the human wanderer in Caspar David Friedrich's famous romantic masterpiece. Wyeth's bronze bell still ponders the sea, inviting us to peer into the abyss and listen to the infinite. Wyeth achieves a similar effect with his very familiar 1972 painting, The Islander, this time depicting a ram in stark profile as island sentinel, looking out from the grassy, treeless landscape of Manana onto the open sea. As in Bronze Age, the manifest theme here is Monhegan and Manana history, specifically the history of sheep farming, which transformed the island environment during the 19th century by replacing forest areas with open meadows. As explained in the current exhibition catalog, by the time Wyeth painted this work, sheep farming had practically ended on the island. Although I understand there are still sheep on the island. But they're more or less complete departure has allowed the forest to recover. But the artist has provided here a view into the past, along with the following personal recollection about the ram, which belonged to a man named Ray Phillips on Manana. This is Jamie Wyeth speaking. The Islander is almost a portrait of Ray Phillips. I'd never really painted Ray Phillips, the hermit who was a shepherd on Manana Island, but I used to help him shear sheep there. He helped me with a lot of paintings I did over there, and then he died one winter. I came back the next spring and all the sheep had gone. They were taken off except for the ram. And that ram became a total king of Manana. Nobody could land on Manana for a couple of years. And he was ferocious, a big ram like that. So for weeks, I carried over feed for this animal, and he would get closer and closer. And finally, he really posed for me. He would stand there. He was so majestic looking. Majestic looking and looking majestically, I would say. Wyeth's words, like the picture, imbue this non-human animal with ferocity, but also sentient awareness and visual acumen, traits not unlike those of the artist himself. Although Wyeth describes the picture as almost a portrait of Ray Phillips, it serves as a kind of self-portrait through identification with an animal who was, like him, a resident islander, observing the Monhegan environment with keen eyes. The animal's placement in the foreground produces Wyeth's trademark repoussoir effect, heightening the sense of distance as we join the ram in looking out through the island atmosphere for miles. The third and final artist I will discuss today is Sylvia Alberts, a self-taught painter from New York City who began spending summers at Monhegan in 1973. When she was in her mid-40s and kept coming back each year until her death in 2015. Using a technique she called designed realism, marked by vivid contrasts and broad patterns of color and light, Alberts worked in various genres, including still life, flower painting, and landscape. My focus here will be on her landscape pictures, which depict trees, hills, buildings, and rocks at Monhegan in dramatic silhouettes that render natural forms as flat, two-dimensional, abstract patterns against brighter areas of color, as in the work titled Sunset Tree of 1997, which I just had the pleasure of seeing at Adam Lynn's house a short time ago. It's beautiful. The stark contrast between the crisp silhouettes and background light suggests once again the characteristic clarity of Monhegan's atmosphere in dry, clear weather. With the subtle introduction of blue at the left, Alberts also evokes the ocean and the distant horizon, thereby providing her own take on the visual poetics of spatial depth we've already seen in the work of Kent and Wyeth. As with those artists, but in her own way, Alberts engages the distinctive island ecology of Monhegan to experiment with form and perception. Comparing Sunset Tree with another work by Alberts titled Fish Houses, Twilight, Monhegan of 1999, we can see not only continuity in her approach to landscape, but also evidence of her belief that both human and non-human structures at Monhegan merit aesthetic interest, however ordinary they might be. This egalitarian approach to subject matter reflects once again a modernist perspective, open to beauty and visual interest in virtually any material or motif. It also implicitly confirms the power of Monhegan's atmosphere and other environmental conditions here to help generate endless forms for artistic ends. In a 2000 picture titled Big Wind Monhegan, Alberts beautifully captured the appearance of cirrus and cirrocumulus clouds, high altitude formations of atmospheric ice crystals generally associated with fair weather in cold conditions. Below, the island environment of Monhegan has been rendered with almost symbolic simplicity in a small stand of silhouetted trees at the bottom center, surrounded by the sea. By reducing the island environment to these basic forms in contrast to the vastness of the sky and ocean, Alberts, in effect, reinterprets the historical aesthetics of the sublime in modern terms. Here we are invited to see for miles and miles, both literally and metaphorically. For me, all three of these artists, Kent, Wyeth, and Alberts, demonstrated unusually creative adaptation to the island ecology of Monhegan by exploiting the distinctive atmospheric clarity and using it as a source of inspiration for generating endless visual forms in painting. While it would be inaccurate to describe their adaptation as evolutionary in a strict Darwinian sense, there's no question that Kent, Wyeth, and Alberts occupied and responded to the dynamic niche of the Monhegan environment with unusual attentiveness. However, since dynamism entails change, what changes are occurring on Monhegan that might alter its artistic traditions and trajectories? The catalog of the current exhibition discusses various changes that have occurred in the terrestrial ecology of the island, notably regarding agriculture, livestock, deer, ticks, invasive plant species, and human tourism. I'll conclude with a few remarks about another category of change that pertains to the atmospheric theme of my presentation, namely air pollution from mainland wildfires. Last year in August, and again this year, wildfire smoke emanating from Canada had a noticeable impact on atmospheric conditions and air quality in Maine, as documented in reports like these. Less than 2 weeks ago, someone posted this photograph on Facebook showing people viewing a smoky red sunset from the Island Inn on Monhegan, prompting one person to leave a comment saying, "Too bad forests have to burn to get that beautiful shot." Daily Air Now fire and smoke maps generated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and Forest Service show the locations of active wildfires, along with air quality information for all of North America. There are fires that are actually burning. I took, I think, screenshot these 2 days ago. As indicated in this map and legend, the Maine coast currently has moderate air quality. It's defined as moderate according to a scientific analysis of a certain amount of particulate pollution, which is color-coded as yellow, moderate. So a lot of moderate here, resulting in an advisory recommendation that reads as follows. Unusually sensitive people consider reducing outdoor activity, go inside to cleaner air if you have symptoms. Such conditions resonate with a statement in the essay by photographer Akra Shep for the current exhibition catalog, which I quote here at length, along with one of his photographs. As Shep observes, the boreal forest is burning in Canada. In June of 2023, smoke engulfed New York City as well as much of the United States. The skies above my house were an apocalyptic orange, and the air was foul and acrid. I was at my lakeside cabin in Ontario 2 weeks ago, and the sunset was very orange, almost blood red. He goes on to say, that was the week before I scheduled to photograph the southernmost part of the coast boreal forest of Monhegan Island. Today, as I write, more than 50,000 square miles in Canada have already burned, an area that is larger than the country of Greece, and the fires continue to burn. When I began this project, I knew I would learn a great deal. I also knew that climate change would inform much of that knowledge. I could not know when I started that the issues I sought to make visible through photography on Monhegan would also be in dialogue with what is happening across the United States and beyond. As much as I enjoyed witnessing the beauty of the land and the coast, I felt a responsibility to see it clearly. As change comes to the island in the years ahead, these images will be part of the record of this moment in time. Shep's statement raises interesting questions about the role of art in this era of climate change, when island ecologies of places like Monhegan have become more vulnerable to distant environmental forces than ever before. Under such circumstances, what will happen to the character and identity of Monhegan and countless other places increasingly impacted by a warming planet? What is the responsibility of art, and what does it mean to see clearly? Will it be enough for artists to continue capturing the signature clarity of Monhegan's atmosphere on those beautiful days, even if they become more and more rare? Or do artists have a responsibility to confront the effects and causes of climate change directly by exposing its negative consequences? That's where my text ends, but I thought I would show a few more works of art that I just kind of randomly picked from my archive of course lectures in art and ecology that address issues like this as maybe a prompt for discussion about what are good and maybe not so good artistic strategies for confronting what may become a kind of increasing reality. So I start with Claude Monet, one of his famous Waterloo Bridge in fog pictures of 1903. And as many of you probably know, he spent a lot of time in London. He loved London. He loved the fog of London because it produced effects that he considered. Uh-oh. The smoke is really having an effect. Okay. We're back. Yeah, great. So Monet, as he indicated in quotes and in many, many paintings, he actually loved the fog of London. Environmental historians have made it clear to us in recent years that what we call fog in London is actually smog that was produced by coal burning fires all over the city. And Monet actually knew that because there's another letter he wrote where he went out in the morning to paint one day in London, and it was a clear day, and he was frightened because his fog wasn't there. He wanted the fog, but he said in his letter, "I'm confident that once Londoners start their coal fires burning, that the fog will come back," and it did. And so I have a lot of interesting conversations with my students about what to make of this. Some students say, "Bad Monet, you're beautifying pollution. We don't want to do that today." And others say, "Well, he's just acknowledging a reality about modern urban industrial life." But it's a kind of quandary, I think, and it's one that I think a lot of artists are still sorting through today. Another artistic mode that could be considered is one inspired by this little 19th century picture by an American artist named David Gilmore Blythe. So I included this in a big exhibition I curated a few years ago called Nature's Nation, American Art and Environment, because it's really the first example of what I would call environmental justice critique in art, because it shows a man who's a kind of nomadic vagrant traveling through a landscape of probably West Virginia or Western Pennsylvania that's been completely transformed by the new oil industry that has exploded on the scene after 1859. And the signs on the post all advertise great financial deals to be had by buying up land that might have surface indications of petroleum beneath. But he stands there in this kind of puddle of muck surrounded by the wreckage of an older agricultural order of economy and wonders where to go in this new completely changed environment. So that's another way that an artist might respond to pollution in the air. A more kind of up-to-date modern or even postmodern pop way of addressing air pollution appears in Ed Ruscha's Standard Station of 1966. Ed Ruscha was part of the 1960s pop generation, and he was fascinated by the regularity and repetition of new kinds of architectural forms like gas stations that were spreading out across the country and providing convenient services to Americans as they were engaging in travel in automobiles more and more. But he sort of subtly hints at the downside of that new emerging commercial culture with this haze that weighs heavily on the horizon. Very subtle kind of gesture of addressing the realities of air pollution, but one that's interesting nonetheless. And even more kind of subtle to the point of being so abstract that it's really hard to kind of discern what to make of it. It's Bruce Naumann's LA Air book project, where he went out in Los Angeles in various times of day and various weather conditions and various degrees of pollution and took photographs, which he then reproduced as whole pages in the book without any kind of color modification to show on a kind of macro scale what the air could look like at various times in that most polluted city of America, at least in the 1970s. 1970 being, of course, the year of the first great Earth Day celebration and the rising environmental awareness, which arguably is culminating today in projects like this. One of the most kind of vivid, to my mind, examinations of air pollution, one that connects a number of cultural and social and economic dots in a way that makes it really hard to ignore the ecological and economic relationships around air pollution, is George Agoni's series of photographs titled Oil-Rich Niger Delta series, which is a quote taken from a statement by a famous Nigerian environmental activist who was arrested by the Nigerian government in the 1990s and executed for questioning the regime's policies regarding the environment. And Ogoni boy refers to a particular community in the Niger River Delta where the Niger River empties out into the Atlantic Ocean, and which had been a kind of agricultural breadbasket for the Ogoni community and the Nigerian people at large. And now it's become a place of petroleum extraction on an enormous industrial scale, such that people this is what they see in their backyards every day, with gas flares and walk on their shoes and that sort of thing. So this is, I would say, an example of art in photography that addresses pollution in a way that also relates it directly to certain kinds of problems of environmental justice. And let's see, do I have another one here? Oh yeah, a slightly more recent and more abstract and in some ways more aesthetically beautiful approach to addressing air pollution appears in Andrea Poli's Particle Falls. Working with chemists and atmospheric scientists, she developed a technique to link the measurement of particulate pollution in the air with laser light projections, such that they would move and change density over time in these kind of time-based displays that she installed in a variety of places. I had the opportunity to see one of these in 2015 when I went to Paris during the big climate conference in Paris in 2015. I wasn't one of the negotiators, but there were a lot of cultural and artistic events and exhibitions in conjunction with that. And I was invited to give a talk, and Andrea Poli was there talking about this work, Particle Falls, which has traveled around the United States as well. So that's a variety of artworks. I thought I would just include once and for all. I know it's hot and I know it's a long night here, so I'll just make this very brief. But some of these issues kind of really came home for me in 2019 when I was a scholar in residence at the Getty Research Institute in Santa Monica, in Los Angeles. And here's the Getty Center, which is an extraordinary facility, institution of museums and conservation and historical research. There's the Getty Research Institute, where I had an office. I was part of this cohort of scholars who were thinking about art and ecology. I had by far the best office I'll ever have in my life. The view of the Pacific Ocean, the air was clear, and a view of Robert Irwin's amazing Getty Garden down below. But one night in October, we were awakened in the middle of the night by fire alarms instructing us that we needed to evacuate our scholar housing complex. And because of the Getty fire, which was this enormous wildfire that just engulfed the Santa Monica Hills right next door to the Getty Center, which, was perched up on a hill like an island, but was not immune to these occurrences and had to shut down. And the Getty Scholar Housing Complex, which is down the hill over here in Brentwood, was also closed, and we had to evacuate for 2 weeks while they put out the fire. The Getty Center was unscathed because they have state-of-the-art irrigation systems that protect it. And in fact, it serves as a kind of headquarters for the fire department in putting out these fires. But this really came home for me. And this is actually a photograph that one of my fellow scholars took the minute we were evacuated, with the glow of the wildfire just right up the hill. So art and ecology became kind of real for us, not just a ivory tower scholarly enterprise at that point. And I think I'm not trying to scare anyone. The air seems quite nice today here, but it does seem like these issues will be something we'll need to think about in the coming years, and maybe something for artists to think about too. What are the different strategies that they might use in addressing these kinds of concerns? I can't promise to have answers to your questions, but I'd be happy to field them, or any comments you might have, or any corrections. There are people here who know a lot more about Monhegan than I do. So please, any thoughts?
One in the back.
Oh, yeah.
I just had a thought with the George Sodi Niger Delta series.
Yeah.
What immediately came to mind for me was Memphis and the AI computers,
Oh,
the pollution,
the AI data center generating using
the pollution.
enormous amounts of power. Yeah.
And in marginalized, already stressed.
Yeah, that's an issue in my state of opinion too. And I think that's a great observation. I don't know of any data centers near here, but
No, not Monhegan relevant.
yeah, but still, just asking that question, I think, is important, because it makes us realize that things that happen far away can still have a kind of ripple effect. Yeah, I one of the things that first got me interested in thinking about art and ecology was looking at the photography of another artist named Shubhankar Banerjee, who was a Calcutta-born Indian scientist who worked at Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico, and also for Boeing. And he decided to become a photographer, so he went to live in Alaska for a year, like what Across Shep did, right? And took photographs through 4 seasons in the Arctic of snow-capped mountains and migrating birds and indigenous communities, and on and on and on. And when his photographs were scheduled to be exhibited at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in Washington, it was right during one of the many debates in Congress over whether or not there should be oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And one of the senators, it was Barbara Boxer, showed one of Banerjee's photographs during the Senate debates over that subject. And then suddenly Banerjee learns that his exhibition at the Smithsonian has been dramatically downsized, moved from the main galleries to basically a closet under the escalator with all of the labels removed. And it was proof for me that what happens in the most remote places even when it's beautiful, can have real power. And that, to me, said something about the power of art to address these issues in a way. Yeah.
Do you use Delgado in your teaching?
Oh, I've shown some of his photographs.
Because there's this tension here between art and again, the political situation.
Absolutely. I've only shown the photos he took in Kuwait after the first Gulf War, when the fire teams had to go in and plug all of those burning wells that Saddam Hussein had lit on fire. And the photos he took there were just amazing. These guys just drenched in oil and risking their lives to put the fires out. But yeah, he's a very important photographer and artist who I started teaching this class focusing on North America, but as I've made it more and more global, artists like him play an increasingly important role. Because you can't really talk about art and ecology without talking about global interconnections. Yeah.
I would consider including Thomas Cole, because Thomas Cole, a lot of his early work, and he was one of the founders of the whole Hudson River Valley School, he experienced in England when he was young, the Industrial Revolution and how bad it was. And so a whole history vein of American landscape painters was trying to say, don't do here what was done there.
Yes, indeed. The Cole was crucial. A contemporary of Caspar David Friedrich, who, like Friedrich, went out in the woods and made sketches and then went back to the studio and made some of the most beautiful landscape paintings of
But
the
also
American.
Fall of an Empire.
Yes,
Right,
yes. He
right.
was quite critical of what he saw as a kind of imperial tendency in America in the 19th century. He gradually, as his career developed, his views softened a little bit, but his paintings and his essay on American scenery are really kind of foundational for thinking about art in relation to the environment. And for that reason, the Metropolitan Museum of Art did a wonderful exhibition a few years ago, curated by Betsy Kornhauser and Tim Berenger, called Thomas Cole's Journey, where they looked at his travels back and forth between Europe, growing up in industrial Lancashire, seeing pollution on a daily basis as a child, and then coming to the United States and being kind of mesmerized by the beauty of the woman. So yes, definitely.
You know, I went to the Hudson River School as well, but I'm reminded of some paintings where you're seeing this wonderful landscape, but you've got the smokestack.
Yeah.
You know, in the picture, it
Yeah.
has the warning. And that led me to thinking about your reference to the Sylvia Elberts, and the reference to the sublime
Mhm.
in her work. How did you choose the three artists that you focused on?
Well, I mean, I suppose Kent and Wyeth are all
Right.
predictable, but I do find their works to be unusually vivid in their depiction of the atmosphere. Like Kent is famous for that,
Right.
and there almost seems to be no atmosphere in Kent's pictures. It's so clear. And so the forms that he's depicting stand out vividly. And he seems to kind of experiment with how to compose and arrange them in interesting ways, suggesting a kind of quiet, abstract sensibility, even though he's viewed as a realist. And Wyeth is similar in that regard. I guess I stumbled across the work of Sylvia Alberts just reading about Monhegan more recently and thought, what an interesting artist. And I watched this great video by the WAMI organization, the Women Artists of Monhegan Island, and she was featured as one of the artists in that video, talking about her work. And she seemed unusual because she was self-taught, and her approach seems, again, to kind of combine realism and abstraction in interesting ways.
I was preoccupied with the sky and the
Yeah.
atmosphere.
Yeah, those silhouettes, I guess, I really caught my eye not just because they're kind of beautiful patterns, but because again, we see those most clearly when the air is clear. And there's something about the environment of a place like Monhegan where the wind just blows over the island, and at sunset, those kinds of views. I mentioned this place I have in Canada, this little A-frame cottage my dad built by hand in 1964 on a lake north of Duluth, and the sunsets there are similar to ones you see here. But I have been haunted a little recently by the wildfires and by the oddness of the redness of the sunsets. So when I see those silhouettes of the trees, I think, oh, that's beautiful. And oh, what does it mean? It's like this mixed feeling I have. Yeah.
So you sort of described two different ways that artists reflect their views on the environment. Thomas Cole maybe shows an ideal version of,
Mhm.
The world as it could be or different from what he grew up with. And then pictures depicting, the difference between Rye and Raphael Kempier or New York City. It's just cloud.
Yeah.
It's like you can just tell the difference, you can tell the pollution's right there, they're described as a whole screen. So as you think about people, you sort of left us with a challenge, right? Which is to say, okay, well, this was the last 200 years.
Mhm.
Why don't you think about what's happening now?
Mhm.
Because we're exempt from the challenge because the museum.
That's right.
So
No
artists,
living
so
art.
we're exempt from your challenge, but if we weren't, like, how would you think about those two strategies that
Yeah.
people might use to talk about the impact of the environment today through art?
Well, the museum is exhibiting the work of Akra Shep right now. And I wonder if you could consider having an exhibition at some point in the future about conversations between contemporary living artists and historical artists. Maybe you've done that already, I don't know, but the contemporary artists could reflect on the now and the change. And the historical artists could be this kind of benchmark of Monhegan identity and cultural imagination. And I think that could be quite interesting. And that's happening a lot in museums these days. I find that curators increasingly are putting historical art in conversation with contemporary art, because the old sort of, well, social evolutionary march from antiquity to the present, as a kind of linear development is getting a little tired for a lot of people. And so mixing up past and present is becoming more, I think, provocative and interesting for people. That's why you have artists like, I don't know, Kahindi Wiley, showing up in a gallery of Baroque art in the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, where I live. Contemporary African-American artist who works in a mode of portraiture that kind of resembles 17th century European art, but he puts up surprising subjects into his pictures, and it provides an interesting opportunity to think about historical change. And it seems to me, this is obvious probably, but when we talk about climate change, the Anthropocene, these are things that didn't just happen yesterday. They've been developing over long periods of time. And so it seems to me that bringing the past and present together in a conversation is kind of necessary. I don't know, that some of the works I showed you at the end, maybe would not be, they wouldn't kind of fit the tradition here, obviously. But Accra Sheps does to some extent because it's a landscape. But I think contemporary artists can be quite interesting sometimes. Yeah.
How do you think about the tension of an island that needs energy? Like the other night, there was a meteor shower, but if you looked up, you could see a lot of Starlink satellites. And then also, if maybe what would the views of Rockwell Kent look like if there were windmills in the ocean?
Right.
And you saw this tension between
bringing electricity and utilities to
Yeah.
an island like this versus keeping it pristine and the, beautiful imagery.
I use Starlink at my cabin in Ontario, but I don't like making that guy richer. But it's the only thing that works out there. And I think that sounds hypocritical, I know, but I think we live in an age of ineffable compromise where we just have to kind of let go of the idea of being pure. And we need to do the best we can and try to nudge things in the right direction while admitting that we're kind of embedded in things that are problematic. I think that's for me, maybe that sounds like a cop-out to, I know it will sound like a cop-out to activists, but I think that it's sort of unavoidable because no one can really be outside of climate change. It's here. It touches us every day. I was really, I think, helped in understanding that fact or this predicament by reading the work of the sort of eco-philosopher and literary scholar Timothy Morton, who's written a number of books that explore this problem. His book Hyperobjects, it's weird, but he makes interesting points about how the problems are so big that we can't really escape them. All we can do is try to operate within them and make things better.
Even, so I'm getting back into landscape painting
Sure.
after decades. And
Great.
I'm aware color theory is different when you're dealing with a smoky environment.
Mm,
Like everything
mm,
is influenced in ways that you can't even really apply perhaps some of the traditional teachings in such a dramatic way.
right. Chevreul's contrasts of color, reds and green or whatever, things get a little messed up when there's London smog or something like that. But maybe we come up with new theories that respond to this complicated situation. And I mean, there are lots of different approaches to landscape painting out there. I particularly like this contemporary landscape, Rackstraw Downs or Rackstraw Downs, yeah, who he knows his landscape traditions. He's an immaculately skilled painter, but he uses his work to kind of acknowledge some of these complexities, similar to Alexis Rockman, another New York-based artist who he paints on a very, very large scale. He was trained in the classic academic tradition of landscape painting, but he comes at it with an almost surrealist sensibility of odd juxtapositions and sometimes discomforting ideas. His painting at the Smithsonian American Art Museum called Manifest Destiny, it's this giant mural that would take up this whole wall, and it shows a kind of futuristic vision of New York City 1,000 years in the future after sea level rise has basically engulfed the city, at least according to certain scientists that he consulted about that possibility. And he consults with scientists a lot. And I think that's really interesting. So I think we maybe need to be open to new approaches, even to the oldest genres like landscape.
So I'd like to return to where you began,
Okay,
which is about evolution.
yes.
It explores on the edge how you can adapt better to what you find rather than changing the environment, changing yourself.
Mhm.
The artist, the imagination, and an eye. How does the artist help us evolve to adapt to what we
Yeah.
cannot stop at this point?
Yeah. I think Darwin would probably have been the first to say that it's really hard for us to decide to evolve. Because natural selection works through a kind of cancellation process rather than choice. There were certain competitors of Darwin who believed that we could shape our destinies through evolution, and that thinking got a little ugly sometimes. But I think that artists have this tremendous gift of saying things that we can't say in any other forms of speech. They have a kind of freedom that the rest of us don't have. So they can say things with images that are hard to express in, say, journalism or political discourse or even science. I've spoken to many scientists who say, I wish that my scholarship could reach as many people as a painting by whoever does, because the art travels fast. I think artists also have another tremendous skill, and that is that they can imagine things that don't exist or don't exist yet, so that they can imagine a future that might be better. And so we should pay attention to what artists imagine for us about what might be, because I mean, that could be many things. It could be a clear sky, but it could also be a healthy cooperative community that an artist imagines and even fosters through communication and hearing some of the folks here talk about the organizations that collaborate on this island. It's really impressive, the kind of spirit of collaboration that seems to exist here and that has produced amazing projects like this and has succeeded in preserving the forest and getting rid of the ticks and all these things. And so, and artists have been around and part of in those discussions, it seems. And so, artists through their imagination help us see things that haven't happened yet. That's a very general answer to your question, but that's my belief.